now that the season is essentially over and you have seen what this team is, they finished the season 7-5. Elisa Tuiaki resigns as a defensive coordinator. Changes have begun. We told you last week on Twitter, and we'll tell you now, sources at BYU told us, that changes were coming and they are going to be significant. And I think when you look at football, I think football is, anytime you change coaching staffs or make changes on a staff, those are significant changes. I don't think those are the most seismic changes that are coming to BYU. I think you're going to see a lot of middle management changes. I think the power struggle that has been going on inside the BYU, athletic program, this battle between the financial people and the sports people at BYU Athletics, somebody's won and somebody's lost. And there's a real good chance you don't know the names that are involved. You don't know the players. But let's be straight about it. Change has to happen at BYU. If this team is ever going to get to the top of the Big 12, change has to happen. If BYU football is ever going to have a seat at the college football playoff table, major changes have to happen, both on the coaching staff, but in the administrative side of the business end of BYU Athletics. And I think that's where the biggest changes have been made. It has been described to me, and frankly to us, over the last 2 months by multiple boosters and sponsors, people who spend their hard-earned money to support BYU football, that they're not going to spend their hard-earned money to support BYU football anymore, not because of the team, but because of the administrators on the sponsorship side. Something has to give. And Jake, I think the resignation of Elisa Tuiaki is just the beginning.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the resignation of Tuiaki is just the poster child for what's to come. I think that in college football, it's a very complicated sport. When you look at, the name Tom Homo, but you don't know all the people below Tom who do all this different stuff that inevitably impacts the program. And that to me is sort of the wild card, the X factor in great programs, really successful programs, and programs that tend to be average or tend to not get to where they want to go. And I think it's, timing, in my opinion, is really unfortunate for this because you are heading into the Big 12. Like, it would have been great if you didn't have any of these issues and you were a 10-win team this year and everything was perfect. But unfortunately, that's not where you're at right now. And so I think waiting to make these changes is also a foolish thing to do. Like, you're heading into the Big 12. You need to make changes. You need to be aggressive about those changes. Things need to change. So to me, when, you have people telling us that, hey, we're not going to spend money, and anytime money's impacted, I'll just say this, anytime money's impacted, you know that there are problems because money flows really well through college football. I think we all know that. So when people, boosters, whatever, start to say, hey, we're not going to spend money on this program because of the way this or that is going down, inside the program, you have issues. So to me, like when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, a month ago about, hey, should they fire Tuiaki now? Like, is Ed Lamb in trouble? Like, these defensive side of the ball guys, when everyone's like, oh, the defense sucks, you should fire all of them. It's a bigger conversation. And that to me, I'm not going to say it feels daunting, but I think it's just time to sort of get to it, because you want to head into the Big 12 and you want to fast track success in the Big 12 as quickly as possible. Because again, I don't think it's an option to not be good in the Big 12 for like 5 years. Like, you probably have like 2 seasons where you could be average, but then you kind of got to get on with it. So this is where that process starts, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think I'm not going to say you're overdue here, but I think there's a couple of things that are very clear. And one of those is that there is major dysfunction in the support system at BYU. I think the conversations that we've had on this show previously and the conversations we have touched on don't even begin to describe the dysfunction at BYU. I mean, when you have long-time sponsors, when you have long-time boosters and supporters that spend real money at BYU, I mean hundreds of thousands of dollars at BYU, when you have that caliber of sponsors saying, we're just not going to do that anymore because we don't like the way we're being treated. We don't like the way that things are being done. That's a huge problem. And I think what you're seeing is the trickle-down effect of things like the Built Bar deal that was so transformative for BYU Athletics. That's kind of where it stopped, though. Those groundbreaking deals haven't continued. That growth in NIL, there's been no organization. There's been no money-making machine put in place. And I think people assume because BYU was groundbreaking and out in front on NIL that things would just continue to roll and the wheels and the rails would be greased and the money-making, it never happened. It never happened. And it's because people have this myth about control, that they've got to have control and I'm the decision makers. And I think what people found out the hard way is that control is a myth. And at BYU, you're either winning football games because everybody's pulling the rope in the same direction, or the rope gets tattered like it did this year. You continue to see on the field, the defense was an absolute joke this year. I think people knew this was going to be an issue. But if you're making money and you're winning games despite the defense, Elisa Tuiaki and the friends of the program can keep their jobs. But when you're not, and when your kicker can't make a kick, and guys like Ed Lamb, those guys have to be called to account. Elisa Tuiaki has to be called to account. He resigned from the program the other day, which is exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But that's just the beginning. I think what you're going to see in the football department is, I think Jan Jorgensen's probably going to have a role change. I think he's probably going to get more responsibility. Kalani Sitake does not like being dictated to when it comes to hiring on the coaching staff. I think we all saw that with the Theismann. I think that Kalani Sitake wants his guys on his coaching staff, and I think you're going to see that. The question is, what other changes is Kalani Sitake willing to make? A lot of people have brought up the strength and conditioning department at BYU, specifically for BYU football, that they don't train their football players to be, position specific. And that's a real problem when you're talking about trying to win games at the Big 12 level. Look at what happened at Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley leaves there. Venables steps in, and everybody thought this was going to be easy. Well, it turns out it's not easy because the Big 12 is a meat grinder. When you look at the bottom of the conference, hell, you look at TCU in the college football playoff, that tells you a lot about the quality and the depth. And I think it's shocking quality and depth. When you look at TCU, nobody saw an undefeated season coming out of TCU. I don't care what anybody says. But you look at Kansas and K-State, you look at some of the teams that were really surprising in this conference, that tells you the quality and depth. Not of basketball in the Big 12, but of football. And I think if you are BYU and you have aspirations of shortening that learning curve, that is inevitable, and it is always steep when you join a major conference. And as much success as you had as an independent, I think it's going to be very difficult to replicate that success if you do not see significant changes both on the coaching staff and in the business end of things at BYU.
Yeah, and I wonder how these changes impact, really important topics like the transfer portal and your ability to get guys. How do they impact, the money that comes through the program? Like when, because it's not if anymore, when these changes go through the program, is that a positive change, or does that in a long-term sense, does that negatively impact the program? That's what I think is on the line here, because again, you have, we all remember when, guys like Kyle Whittingham or like David Shaw the other day, or like these major names, these major head coaches talking about the transfer portal and everything that goes on with that. Like, that's a very controversial thing. So what I'm getting to here is these changes, if you're not in alignment, from top to bottom through your program on things like the strength and conditioning program or the transfer portal or what kind of defense you want to run, or, whatever the case may be, you're not going to be successful. And so I wonder, now that the changes are here and they're happening, how long has it been this way? Because obviously, like we just said, we've had this information for a little while now, but I wonder, has it been 2-3 years? Has it been, you know what I mean? Like, how long have you been dealing with this? Like, who could you have been if things had been a little different? That's what I always go to. And that's why I say these changes are really important. And if you get this right, you could be really successful in the Big 12 inside of 3-4 seasons. And I think that's, again, a really important thing to keep in mind when you notice these things happening.
Yeah, I think you have to look up and down this coaching roster. It's guys like Preston Hadley. It's guys like, and, honestly, Elisa Tuiaki had such a big, what's the right way to say it? He had such a big influence over the other coaches on the staff. The question is, who's the next defensive coordinator? Because if you're going outside of the ecosystem at BYU to find a defensive coordinator, is a guy like a Preston Hadley going to keep his job? As a guy who works with defensive ends, I mean, that's a really important role. The pass rush is a massive problem at BYU. How much of that is on Preston Hadley? How much of that is on Elisa Tuiaki? How much of that is on your inability to keep that defensive line healthy? How much of that is on the group as a collective? How much of that is on Kalani Sitake, who I think we all know is a defensive guy? So if you look up and down the roster and you look at guys like Kevin Clune, were the linebackers really a problem? Well, I would tell you the linebackers weren't really a problem this year at BYU outside of the fact you couldn't keep them healthy and on the field.
Yeah.
That was a problem with the linebackers, and that's not on a Kevin Clune. That's more on your strength and conditioning guys. And so if you look at Nu'utafisi, who is the head of strength and conditioning, now you got to start asking yourself, are we doing this the right way? And the frustrating part about this conversation about strength and conditioning, it goes all the way back to Bronco Mendenhall, like deep into his tenure, the major changes. And then they hire a strength and conditioning coach, and we're all, just marveling at how different things are. And they're describing the basics of strength and conditioning that were never happening at BYU, that are not happening now, depending on who you believe and what you listen to. Hey, are you getting defensive backs and defensive linemen and offensive linemen strength training together? Well, that's a problem, right? But it's just this vicious cycle. And I wonder how much of this now waits on the bowl game. And I wonder how much of this now waits on the season to really have some finality to it. Because 7-5 is not a good season by anybody's measure. It just isn't. If you don't win 10 games at BYU, you didn't have a good season. And that's exactly where the bar should be. If you're the Utah Utes, if you're not playing for a Pac-12 championship, you didn't have a good season. They had arguably one of their most difficult and on paper, one of their worst seasons in recent memory, Utah. Nobody felt good about where this team was at. But they're playing for a Pac-12 championship and a spot back in the Rose Bowl. And so you can argue that Utah had a good season. There's no way to argue that BYU had a good season.
Yeah, and I have to imagine these, like when you ask the question of, are all these changes, is this like, is there essentially like an avalanche of change just waiting for the bowl game to be completed, like in I have to think on some level, yeah, there is. Like, these conversations are happening. You're telling me that Kalani Sitake's not going up and down his coaching chart right now saying, okay, hey, like, just like you did, like, hey, this guy did a good job with what he controls, but he was held down by the fact that his guys were all hurt. So let's look here or there. Like, that's happening, and that's why I say, like, I see all the noise about, oh, you got to go and, talk to Bronco about being a defensive coordinator. I don't think Bronco would even humor a defensive coordinator role. That's not where he's at in his career. Like, if I was Bronco Mendenhall, I wouldn't be looking at that. I'm a head coach, right? So to me, it's not as simple as just digging up an old name and bringing him back into the program. That's not how this works. And I'm telling you, you have to get to a place where you're recruiting at a really high level through the transfer portal. I don't give a damn if there are teams doing it illegally until it's legislated better, until there are more rules around it.
Legal or illegal.
Yeah,
you're either leveraging the transfer portal or this is the Deion Sanders conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
It is the BYU, for better or for worse, is not everybody's cup of tea. It just is what it is. But we've known that for 100 years.
Sorry, folks, that's what it is.
Not every player belongs at BYU. BYU is not for every player. That doesn't mean you don't call them and say, hey, Deion Sanders, your son's a really great quarterback. We'd love to have him come visit BYU. Is Deion Sanders' son, was he ever going anywhere but Jackson State? He wasn't. Should you have called anyways? You should have. right? Like you don't, it's what Bronco always said. We don't use the honor code, for instance. We don't use the honor code as an excuse. We use it as a tool in our recruiting bag. That's exactly what it is. When you make these excuses about things like the honor code, or, we make these excuses about lifestyle, and it is what it is. You know what you're getting into at BYU. And again, not to play the two off of each other, the student experience at Utah and the student experience at BYU are two completely different deals.
Facts.
They're just two completely different deals. If a kid wants to go drink beer, have sex, and play football, you're probably not going to BYU.
Yeah.
Now, are there some who drink beer, have sex, and play football at BYU? There are. Absolutely there are. But that is not the prototypical kid who's looking for that college experience. The prototypical kid who it comes to BYU is not Jamal Williams. That's not who the prototypical football player is at BYU. They are more Harris LaChance. They are more Isaac Rex. They are more Jaron Hall. They are more, LDS-based football players who have always had an eye towards BYU. The kid you have to win, frankly, is the Zach Wilsons of the world. You cannot allow them to go to Boise. They come to BYU, they compete for Heisman's, and they get drafted number 2 in the NFL draft.
Yeah.
Those are the wins you have to have. And Kalani has shown you the ability to do that. But it certainly does not help when your branding department and your ad sales department and your corporate sponsorship department can't get on the same page with the athletic department. That certainly does not help. And the issues that you see with guys like Jamal Williams, with guys like Harvey Unga, and now you see the redemptive story of Harvey Unga, like those guys are critically important to the pipeline. But ask a lot of BYU alums. There's a lot of alums right now who don't feel welcome in Provo. They don't feel welcome there. Again, I point to John Madsen at Utah. Watching the Barton family play on Sundays and Lander Barton exploding on the scene at Utah. And that's because a guy like John Madsen helped recruit them. He physically trained them. John's one of the elite, trainers in the world. He trains them physically. They wind up kicking ass at Utah. Like, you have that pipeline. The closest to that is probably John Beck, right? Who I think ran the alumni flag out this weekend, if I could be wrong. But I think it was this weekend he ran the alumni flag. You look at guys like John Beck, they're working with Jaron Hall in the offseason because now John is one of the most influential quarterback coaches in the country. So you look at a guy like John Beck, but is that enough? It's probably not enough. You've got to make wholesale changes to the system that is in place at BYU because it is dysfunctional, because you're pushing out the guys who build community. You're pushing out the people that pipeline guys like Harris LaChance is a great example.
Yeah.
He always wanted to play at BYU, but too often that guy's not going to BYU anymore, right? And it's no longer, hey, we don't have any more linebacker scholarships, right? That's no longer the argument. You've got to fix the system that has been in place probably back to before Bronco, but certainly during Bronco's time and now during Kalani's time, that is just dysfunctional enough where you're starting to lose kids in recruiting that you really shouldn't lose.
Yeah.
You're losing sponsorship and corporate dollars that you really shouldn't lose. You're losing that support base in the community, in the Salems of the world, in the Orams of the world, in the Lehis of the world, in the footholds, the trenches, the absolute hotbed of BYU football is now very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's because we've lost the relationship-based football program that was BYU, that made BYU so strong, that meant that BYU could actually go to East High School, if you understand the landscape here in Utah, could go to East High School and recruit. That relationship-based football community that formed the Poly Pipeline, that is not such a secret anymore, that put great kids on the field at BYU and Utah. But now they're going other places. They're going to USC. They're going to UCLA. They're going to Oregon. And how did the Nakuas ever not play at BYU?
Yeah.
How does that happen? When you have great schools, when you have Harriman High School or you have Timpanogos and you have all these great football programs.
Yeah, you're like standing in your own way, essentially.
The Corner Canyons of the world. And they're not pipelined to BYU. That's a problem. That is a problem. And I don't know how you fix that. I guess that's the biggest thing. 6:25, Monty in the morning, talking BYU football. Thanks to our friends at Barbecue Pit Stop. You guys were amazing over the weekend, by the way. Before I get to all your comments, I see you guys there. Everybody that was, sending us pictures of your turkey on the smoker, all the pictures of the asado seasoning on Twitter, like on Instagram, like just really good to see community-based support. I joke, but I don't joke about the guys at Barbecue Pit Stop. They're phenomenal. Anytime we're talking football on this show, it's thanks to our friends at Barbecue Pit Stop. 5 Utah locations, from Logan and Layton, Murray, obviously Steve and the guys, Clinton and the guys at Lehigh, in St. George, like just a really good group of entrepreneurs that got together to create the biggest, baddest barbecue smoking community in the country. And that's exactly what it is. You got to get on board at bbqpitstop.com. Whether it is the world famous now asado seasoning that I feel like we are single-handedly responsible for.
Yeah.
Whether it is your turkeys, your ribs, your briskets, your wings, certainly, your Papa Murphy's pizza on the smoker. I'm telling you, if you're not using a pellet smoker, you're not a man. You're not alive. You're not. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, and medical tests will be required. I don't believe if you're still using charcoal briquettes or propane, I just don't believe that you have any testosterone in your body.
Where are we at in society today?
I could be wrong. There are tests to verify it. But if you're not using a pellet smoker, a Traeger, a Yoder, a Big Green Egg, you're doing it wrong, man. I'm telling you, you're doing it wrong. Get to Barbecue Pit Stop. Get online. No matter where you listen to this show, you can find their website at bbqpitstop.com. Jeremy Severe says, it's so interesting that BYU has an elite business school and yet forgot business 101 in the football program. It's all about relationships. It's shocking, Jeremy.
So true, yeah.
Because it is so easy to get off track. And, it's so funny. I was talking to a bunch of radio people Friday and Saturday. You just go through these odd seasons of your life where you're like, oh, hey, yeah, this guy reached out to me on Instagram, or this guy hit me on LinkedIn, and there's been this big conversation over the last probably 6 months in the radio industry about negativity and thought control.
Uh-huh.
And this essentially this paradoxical conversation about radio is eating itself alive, the actual business of radio, because everybody's bought into this idea that radio is dying. I happen to be one of them. It's why we're on YouTube every day. But one of the things, and the reason I bring this up is that negativity is an awfully difficult train to stop. Once that train gets rolling down the track, and once that train of negativity and dysfunction gets rolling down the track, it's impossible to stop without really painful, difficult relationship level changes.
Yeah.
You're seeing that at BYU now. You're seeing that this negativity, oh, we can't do this because X guy in sponsorship screwed my guy over here at Jimmy and Pat's, produce company. Those are the kind of conversations that are happening. Hey, this guy has supported the program for over a decade and we lied to his face. And, there is a story, and I'm going to make up an example, but trust me when I tell you, the people that are involved if I told you their names. So this guy makes widgets. He is the best widget maker in Utah.
Uh-huh.
He goes to BYU and he says, I want to be the official widget maker at BYU.
Right.
Okay, great. Let's do it. So for the last 10 years, these folks have been the official widget maker at BYU. over that 10-year period, some new folks came into the money-making machine at BYU. The corporate sponsorship, the ad, partnership positions at BYU.
Right.
And they have some really close personal friends that make widgets. Now, they're not nearly as good as the widgets of our guy that has been a widget maker for a generation and is the best widget maker in Utah. Pretty much everybody agrees this dude's widgets are the best in the business.
That's right, T.
But this other subpar widget maker, he's friends with the right people. So all of a sudden, when the BYU football team needs somebody to make them widgets, do they go to the guy who's been a long time supporter, who's put his own money into the football program and he's provided widgets whenever he was asked? No, they go to the sponsorship guy's close personal friends who make widgets, not well. And then, unfortunately, the guy who's been making your widgets and is the best widget maker in Utah by far walks in and sees the other guy's widgets being given to the BYU football team. And so the longtime widget maker said, I'm not going to spend my money with BYU anymore. I'm going to take my widgets and I'm going to give them to Utah, and I'm going to give them to UVU, and I'm going to give them to Weber, and I'm going to give them to the Utah Jazz. But I'm not going to, so freely and so readily give them to BYU anymore.
Yeah.
And that story has been repeated to me across 3 different categories. Hey, well, you know what? I've been doing this for this long, but this guy has a buddy at BYU corporate sponsorship, so he got in, and I got pushed out. That's the thing that is so frustrating.
Yeah. Because
for
there's no
so
reason
many people.
for it. There's no reason for it. It doesn't need to be that way. And that's the frustrating part. It's like, okay, cool. So now that we understand the situation, how does that impact things in the bigger picture, right? Okay, that just happened, right? You're losing loyalists, essentially, folks who've been supporting you a long time. So you're losing, conservatively, hundreds of thousands of dollars through that process that was just explained.
Yes.
Which then impacts you in NIL, recruiting, facilities.
But you know how else
hiring.
it impacts you? The guy who's been the longtime widget maker is super connected in the community.
Yeah, that's
so
true
maybe,
too.
So maybe somebody at Timpanogos goes to him and says, hey, man, you're the official widget maker at BYU. I need to get a widget. And the guy says, well, no, I'm not anymore. They screwed me and blah, blah, blah. But I make widgets for Utah. Have you been talking to the guys at Utah?
Uh-oh.
That's real world. That's happening.
Yeah.
That is on the ground. That's happening in the state of Utah, where you are screwing people who have local relationships. And I know one specific football player who was going to BYU and is now going to Oregon.
Yeah.
Because of a situation exactly like this, where he went to a widget maker and the widget maker told him how it is at BYU, and now he wound up at Oregon. I'm just telling you, man.
Yep.
It's happening on a regular basis. Let's see. Saunders Clark says, you're describing the Mormon church. Dig into who makes sacrament cups, etc. Well, yeah, you don't even want to do that. Now we know why the quality of cougar tails have gone down. Come on now. San Diego State Aztec, good morning to you, sir. I have a nephew who received early offers at wide receiver from BYU, Army, Cal, Washington, and a host of other P5 schools. He did not commit to BYU. Great kid, but it would not have been a good fit. And I think that's one of the most important conversations in a high school football player's life.
Yeah.
Is, hey, you know what? Maybe you're not a good fit at this school. But over here, like that, there's nothing wrong with that. Boyd Lake, good morning to you. Kalani needs to hire someone who would be good enough to replace him as a head coach. That should be the mentality. Who? I don't know. Kalani should open up assistant head coaching job to give someone to get someone good for DC. Well, Ed Lamb has to, in my opinion, has to be one of the changes made. I think, and look, I respect Ed Lamb. I know Ed Lamb has been the assistant head coach, safeties and special teams. I know that Ed Lamb and obviously Kalani have a really good relationship, and he's one of the 2016 hires. I totally understand that. But come on now. Can we really just dismiss away the dysfunction on the special teams?
But that's an interesting point, though, what you said there. hey, Kalani and this guy, right, Ed Lamb or whoever, right, Tuiaki, whoever you want to point to, they have a great relationship. That shouldn't be the reason you are hired or fired, right? Like, the reason you're hired or fired should be performance-based. And there's this old, this old concept, I guess, about like, hey, like if you want to win, sometimes that means you can't be nice. And obviously the easiest example is, Kobe being regarded as some terrible teammate, or like, there's a ton of examples in the sporting world, but you know what I mean? Like, sometimes it shouldn't be about like whether you guys enjoy having dinner together after some game or something. Sometimes it needs to be about the level of protection being provided, or how often we're getting to the quarterback, or, whatever example you want to use. And that's been really one of my only issues with Kalani as head coach of this team. I have felt like, hey, we're a little bit too caring about Kalani's personal relationships, or being nice to Idaho State 2 years ago, or whatever. Like, this team, like, I feel like this program needs a little more edginess to it. Like, that's my opinion. I could be a little wrong on that, but I think a little bit of an edge would help this team a lot.
I think the biggest question is, do you want to be respected or do you want to be feared? And can you do both? And I would tell you, you can do both. And I don't think Kalani wants to be feared. I love Kalani Sitake. Do not get me wrong. I am not saying that Kalani is the problem. But I think Kalani is a guy who likes to do what he's always done. And you know what I'm going to say. Doing what you've always done is going to get you what you've always gotten. And listen, as an independent, BYU has been a remarkable success. A remarkable success.
Yeah.
With the win over Stanford, BYU has now defeated every single Pac-12 program. I mean, it's a remarkable feat, right? And as an independent, BYU is 98-56. And a lot of that is for Kalani Sitake. And you have to give him his due respect.
Yep.
But Kalani's a nice guy. And nice guys don't always finish first. And rarely do they ever finish first. And rarely are they ever feared. If you are USC today, I think you both respect and you fear that Utah can beat you. You do. You just do.
Yeah.
And if you are any other team that's going to run into, if you were Oregon, did you have respect or fear either or neither for BYU?
Neither. If you're Oregon, you were like, oh yeah, they're coming to our field. Like, yeah, we're there. Because remember the context. Like, don't forget. Everyone was saying, oh, BYU's going to beat Oregon, including myself. I felt like BYU had a great shot to win that game, and then Oregon goes out and steamrolls BYU, and that was kind of the beginning of the end of the season, if we all remember that. So, no, I don't think that they feared or respected BYU, clearly.
No, but I think Giggity makes a really good point. Good morning, Giggity. If this season wasn't such a disappointment, would any of this be addressed right now? No, friends of the program, it'd still be coaching the defense.
Yep.
I mean, that is the hard, harsh reality of this situation. And it's going to be a real test of who Kalani is as a football coach. Does he have the cojones to go and whack a guy like Ed Lamb? Because that's a big change. And if I'm Kalani Sitake, I'm going into the Big 12. I know we need significant change. We're not making the money we should be making. We're probably not recruiting at the level we should be recruiting at. We're not developing players at the level we should be developing players at. We need to make significant changes.
That's it, Skippy.
Will he do that? Will he change guys who have been in place since 2016?
Pack your shit. Let's go.
Will he do that? I don't think he'll do that. I don't. And again, I think it's one of those things where Kalani wants to be liked sometimes. I think it's one of those things where Kalani wants to be known. He's a good guy. And he is. Nobody questions that.
Yeah.
But I also want a badass. I want the guy that we all thought Kalani was when he got hired. I want the guy that's a savage on defense. I want the guy to really come out and make significant changes, because that takes courage. That takes integrity. And we preach all the time in football about, hey, we're making men. Hey, we're doing this. And we're going to handle hard better. Unless it's me and I got to fire my friends and my coaches who have been here since I've been here. Well, now it's time to walk the walk if you're Kalani Sitake. If we're being totally honest, It is time to make hard changes, difficult changes, emotional changes. It is hard to look a guy in the eye like Ed Lamb or Elisa Tuiaki, because you know this conversation happened probably a month ago. You looked at Elisa Tuiaki in the eye and you said, hey, you know what? We're going to have to go in a different direction here. I love you, brother. I appreciate the time we spent together, but it's time for something different.
Yeah.
How many of those conversations, how much fortitude does Kalani Sitake have for those conversations? Because you need to probably have a half dozen, 6, 8 of them at least.
Keep it real.
I mean, if we are keeping it real, and we do on this show, right? I mean, we tell you every day that we're the truth in, Salt Lake City sports talk. The truth is, change has to come to BYU.
Yeah, and I also think I'm a big believer in these situations. Like, yeah, the conversation is hard, but think about the motivation for the conversation. Like, you're not having the conversation because the world is burning down around you. You're having the conversation because you're just not achieving to the level that you should be achieving at. And that, to me, is if I was Kalani Sitake, that's how I'd be approaching these conversations. I would just be simply saying, hey, you know what, man, I love you, bro, but it's just not good enough anymore, and we got to go a different direction. And that's it. Like, it's just business. And, yesterday you were tweeting and Instagramming and social mediaing about like what, Nick Saban was talking about in that speech he gave after the game, and, and how his players kind of came together. And I really do feel like the players on this football team did come together. Like, I know it's Jaron Hall, and he's never going to say a negative word about the team, but I really do feel like, when we heard, Judy Lawley on the show, when we heard Harris LaChance, when we heard Jaron Hall talking about how, hey, after this game or that game, like, we had a choice. We were either going to look at the opportunities we had before us, or we were going to live in the past. And I feel like now Kalani's in that same position. Now it's time to say, okay, hey, yeah, great. This season didn't work out. We're still 7-5 football team. We're not a losing football team, but we're just not doing what we should be doing. And by the way, you've got this behemoth of an opportunity in the Big 12 coming. So I got to do hard better, as you always say. Like, I got to, have these conversations and make the changes. And I think if I don't know what the benchmark of success is, like how that's going to be defined for this team in the first 2 seasons in the Big 12. But I have to imagine if you're Kalani Sitake, it's just winning football. It's like if you go 7-5, let's say in your first season in the Big 12, is that successful? Like, that's what I think this program has to figure out. I
think you're going to be lucky to be a 500 football team next year. Honest to goodness, this conference is not getting worse; it's getting better.
Yeah,
I mean, and now, granted, Luke Fickell is no longer at Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Let's see how that goes. I mean, I don't know how many people saw he got hired by Wisco over the weekend. But you look at what's coming in, and you look at the UCFs, you look at the Houstons, the BYUs, the Cincinnatis, the Kansas, K-State, TCU. Like, it's not Texas and Oklahoma. It's Kansas and TCU, and you got to beat the bottom of the conference to be good enough to beat the top of the conference, right? And if they played today, is anybody confident that BYU would beat Kansas? I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not. But the other thing that I think is important to say is I'm also not sitting here telling you I think offensive changes need to be had, because I don't think I would not touch a thing on the offense of this team. Now, again, Jacob Conover doesn't look like a kid who's ready to play football. I don't know what happened there. I mean, are you ever going to let him throw another pass or not really? No, that's not what we do here. Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. But again, you have Jaron go out to injury, and Jacob Conover looks like a guy who's just in there to hand the football off. And I just don't understand
why you wouldn't just, like, in this game against Stanford, why wouldn't you just cut him loose? Like, hey, give him the opportunity to throw the football. Like, you literally, they ran it 50 times, I think, or something like that. They were in that neighborhood, if it wasn't 50 exactly. Like, you ran the hell out of the football in this game, as you should have, right? Like, as you should have. But at the same time, development has to happen. And that is one key point for this program that's going to have to improve. Like, figuring out those games where...
Can you stop switching between program and program?
Sorry.
Are you going to be Nick Saban, or are you not?
Let me, guys, listen. All right. So, love the game. Guys had a great performance. Stanford is they're a really well coached team and has a lot of great players. But our program's going to watch the tape, and me personally, I'm going to watch my performance, and we'll get better next week.
Yep, it is what it is. All right, more of your comments. Let's see. What are you guys saying here? Provo Cougar fan, the BYU destruction of October may have been a blessing in disguise. New defensive coaching changes could make BYU competitive in the new Big 12. I mean,
I hope so. Like
every time you go through adversity and every time that you face, specifically in football, when you face losses like this, something good has to come out of it or you're going to get fired.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no doubt about that. And I think when you look at the way that things change in college football. I mean, look at Carolina firing Matt Rule and he ends up at Nebraska. That's unbelievable, the hire Trev Alberts made for the Huskers. Like, you look at Luke Fickell going to Wisconsin. Like, Wisconsin's been disappointing for 5 years. Everybody thought Jim Leonard was getting that job. Not so fast. They got one of the best coaching candidates that was clearly available in Luke Fickell. Like, if you're Kalani Sitake and you're not going to win games, now again, it's a little different at BYU. You have to be LDS, you have to be in good standing, all of it. That job's a little more difficult to fill. But I look at Kalani Sitake, he's the exact right guy.
Yeah.
Well, let's find out if he's the exact right guy, because if he's not willing to make significant changes to his coaching staff, maybe he's not the exact right guy that we thought he was. You know what I mean? Like maybe he's not.
Yeah.
Because it takes balls to make the type of changes that we're talking about.
Come on, man.
I mean, you have to let Ed Lamb go.
And I'm telling you, man, these new hires, the Luke Fickles of the world, right? Like the Matt Rules of the world, when new head coaches go into new positions, what does that mean? They got to build their program. I'm telling you, I know I keep bringing up the transfer portal, but it's only going to get more aggressive. And if you don't have your program buttoned up like that, you're going to lose opportunities just from that standpoint. I mean, you look at what, Lincoln Riley was able to do in 1 year at SC, right? Like, it's very clear what's going on. And again, I'm not even saying that Lincoln Riley cheated. He didn't cheat. He's using the system.
Why do you keep bringing that up?
Because people are talking about it. People are talking about. We've heard multiple references. We had the Saban and Jimbo blow up earlier in the year. David Shaw talked about it.
I don't think anybody is accused Lincoln Riley of cheating.
No, not Lincoln Riley
he's
specifically.
Just kicking your ass.
Not Lincoln Riley specifically. We always get the reference of, hey, there are people who are illegally leveraging the transfer portal.
Yeah,
we hear that all the time.
I think it's so easy. And the reason this bothers me so much is we can't just accept that Lincoln Riley's a better football coach than you are. We can't just accept that Jimbo Fisher's better in the transfer portal than you are. We can't just accept that Alabama lost 2 games. Alabama lost 2 games. Holy cow, they're terrible. Well, I would love to have a football team that lost 2 games. As a Notre Dame fan, I would take a 2-loss season right now today. Right? Like, it's so easy to say, well, this guy cheated. Lincoln Riley did not cheat. Lincoln Riley just did the job better than you. I don't understand why people like Kalani Sitake has not done the job well enough at BYU. Why is that so difficult for people to say out loud? Why is it so hard to talk about Kalani instead of talking about Lincoln Riley or any other coach you want to point to? Kalani Sitake has not done the job well enough. Period. That's it. That's the whole conversation. And again, if your measuring stick is the U, Kyle Whittingham's going to the Pac-12 championship game for the 2nd year in a row, and I'm not the guy who's going to bet against him. I'm not doing it. And again, I'll just say, hey, where's Oregon? Where's Oregon? Oh, Bo Nix. And that guy's hung like a steer. It turns out he's not. He's who we thought he was. Oh, he's hurt. Well, then he shouldn't have been playing. Oh, he's injured. Okay, then he shouldn't have been playing. If he's not capable of winning you games, winning you that game, by the way, you were up double digits in the 4th quarter. We were sitting at Super Chicks in Ogden with just watching that game go down. That had nothing to do with Bo Nix being hurt.
Yep.
You got beat, and we warned you about Reeser, right?
27 unanswered, I believe it was.
They're only at 50% capacity at Reeser because of construction, and it's still a great home field advantage, and you got beat.
Mm-hmm.
You got beat because your head coach made some really bad decisions. Bo Nix didn't execute, and now Utah's going to the Pac-12 championship game. It just is what it is. You got beat because Oregon State was better than you. Oh, but Oregon State was a better football team. Utah's going back to the Pac-12 championship. BYU 7-5, and they're probably going to the Jamaica grass-growing fertilizer treatment system of America Bowl. It's not good enough. Kalani hasn't done his job the last 12 months.